Psychic deception, exposing mind reading, table tipping, and more. Selections from William E. Robinson's writings. Edited and with introduction by David Christopher Lane, Ph.D. Mount San Antonio College, Walnut, California. Narrated by Mark Sherman. Introduction. Table tipping, Ouija boards, and resisting Occam's razor. David Christopher Lane. Back in the spring of 1984, I was teaching a course in Death and Dying at the University of San Diego High School. It was a class comprised of juniors and seniors, and which was then regarded as a fairly unusual subject to teach at a Roman Catholic institution. I was conversant with the subject since first reading Raymond Moody's groundbreaking Life After Life, and following up with Kenneth Ring's more scientific texts, particularly Life at Death, back in the late 1970s, early 1980s. However, like most high school classes, which meet 5 days a week, month after month, my students could get a bit antsy, especially after lunch. I sensed that we needed to liven things up a bit. Bad pun, no doubt. A few days prior, our in-house priest, Father Patrick McNamara, informed me that he and a nun had been doing various experiments, channeling spirits from beyond the grave. I was surprised that a priest and a nun would actually indulge in such necromancy when I knew the church had regarded such practices as mostly demonic. But Father McNamara was a liberal-thinking priest who was attracted to heretical ideas and practices. Later, we would learn a darker side to him, but during that term, we just thought he was nice and friendly, even if a little different. Father Pat, as he liked to be called, asked if he and his nun friend, her name escapes me, could come to my Death and Dying class and demonstrate a spirit medium process called table tipping. I was already familiar with the practice and thought it would be an interesting phenomenon to witness. Moreover, I was quite sure that my students would love to see how it was performed. It was around 1:30 when Father Pat and his nun friend showed up. Father Pat, who served as chaplain, was well known to everyone at the school, so I took a seat in the far back of the classroom and let him introduce the topic and the necessary protocols for plugging into the spirit world. If I remember correctly, he brought in a small card table with him and set it up so everyone could see. He then let the nuns speak about what they were trying to accomplish. The nun mentioned that they had been communicating with a specific spirit entity for the past several weeks, who had the ability to answer almost any question asked of it. Or he, she, they. How did they accomplish such a remarkable feat in communicating with the disembodied spirit? They both attempted to empty their minds and be open to the spirit, which they believed could come through them if they were transparent conductors. Once they were in the right mood and setting, they then placed both of their hands on the card table. At that point, they would then ask a series of questions, and to the wonderment of my students, the table's legs would lift up and then hit the ground. It was like a tapping sound. Each tap, or series of taps, represented a letter in our alphabet. Or, if it was a yes-no type question, 1 tap would be yes, and 2 taps, no. Father Pat and the nun both claimed that they were not moving the table themselves, but that the spirit was using them as conduits, and the spirit itself was doing the lifting. Many of my students were mesmerized and started asking all sorts of questions. And apparently, the table spirit was on a roll that day because my students thought the answers to their respective queries were spot on. It was a fun exercise, but I was a bit flabbergasted by how gullible Father Pat and the nun were about what they thought was happening. Even my more cynical students seemed to be taken in by table tipping. I could only take so much gobbledygook in the back of the room. So I finally asked Father Pat and the nun to remove their hands from the table and let it speak directly to us without their intervention. Surprisingly, they hadn't thought of doing that before, and given their obvious credulity, they both agreed it was a good idea. So, taking their hands off the card table and walking away about 3 feet, they started asking simple yes-no questions of the table spirit to see how it, she, he, they would respond. Silence. We waited for another 3 minutes. More silence. Then one of my more outspoken students yelled out, "Hey, Mr. Lane, your skepticism made it disappear. That sucks." Inferring that there really was a table spirit, but my doubting such a thing, he, she, it, really existed, they got pissed and went back to their nether regions. I couldn't help but start laughing at our group naivete. It was so obvious that Father Pat and the nun were moving the table, and not some disincarnated spirit that has nothing better to do on Tuesday afternoons than show up to a Catholic high school on the hill in San Diego. But Father Pat and the nun didn't see through the charade, and thought, like my student, that being hypercritical of the paranormal was the problem, not the solution to a bad parlor trick, even if performed unconsciously. The next day, one of my students asked me about Ouija boards, and said she knew it worked and that it was a dangerous tool to bring in the devil. I gave a sardonic look at my class and said, "Think about this for a few seconds. Do you really believe that souls from the other side wait until you buy a Canard Novelty Company game and open it up to play it, and then they show up to bedevil the players?" But several of my students then protested. "But Mr. Lane, we know it works. We didn't move the pointer, it moved by itself." At this juncture, I then said, "So you are telling me the pointer, known as the planchette, moved because of some ghost that gets called and comes down and likes to move plastic around?" I continued, "Okay, I have an idea. Instead of having a slippery board in which to move your plastic cursor around, put Velcro down on the playing surface, and put Velcro on the planchette. Do you think it is still going to move without your interference?" My students immediately got my point and realized the real cause of how a Ouija board works. Of course, one of my funnier surfer students then shouted, "Of course it won't work. Spirits don't like Velcro. It is like kryptonite to them." At which we all laughed. Later, I got the opportunity of teaching a graduate course in parapsychology at the University of Humanistic Studies in Del Mar, which eventually turned out to be a disaster. There were about 15 students in the MA course, and they were all eager to explore psychic powers, UFOs, spoon bending, and the like. The fly in the ointment, however, was me. They were under the mistaken impression that I was a believer in all things paranormal. To wit, I was the complete opposite. What I wanted to accomplish in the course was a thorough examination of various parapsychological claims, and see how well they held up to rational scrutiny. In other words, I wanted my students to look for alternative explanations for what others deemed miraculous. Perhaps science wasn't up for the task, and maybe some events are indeed transcendent, and not amenable for a more mundane explanation. But we would never know that if we didn't critically investigate the phenomena from a skeptic's, or a magician's, or a physicist's perspective. I knew it was not going to be an easy sell, because when we went around the room and introduced ourselves and our interests, each student had very firm convictions about angels, channeling, palmistry, astrology, and telekinesis. I distinctly remember one older woman looking me straight in the eye and saying, "I know the spirit realm is real, because I am the reincarnation of the Virgin Mary." Eventually, after going over a series of readings that were required for the class, each student was assigned a research project to investigate further and summarize their findings. The underlying key to the course, however, was that they had to look more objectively at their chosen topic. I still vividly recall when at the end of the term, each of the students, without exception, discovered that what they had believed so full-heartedly, and with certainty, turned out to be much less supernatural than they thought. Indeed, using the tools of Occam's razor, Laplace's dictum, Hume's maxim, and common sense, each student found that the deeper they probed into the subject, the less magical it became. The reasons for this were fairly simple and rudimentary. In our rush to believe, we tend to overlook more straightforward explanations for why and how they occur. Believing something is miraculous enlivens our lives and gives us a sense of purpose and mystery. Yet, as I tried to explain to my class, as I still do today, the mystery of life and the cosmos is not lessened by rationality or logic, just as the stars are not lessened in their beauty because we use telescopes. If anything, science broadens and enlarges our sense of mystery and wonder and awe. But if more often than not, science, which properly employed, does debunk many of the myths and miracle stories we wrongly held to be inexplicable. For some students, the course was an awakening, whereas for others I could sense it was the ultimate buzzkill. You mean the Shroud of Turin is most likely a fraud? My astrological sign doesn't truly reveal my personality traits? Extraterrestrials haven't visited Earth yet? Crop circles are man-made? Speaking in tongues is not unique to Christianity? My guru is a pedophile? Uri Geller can't bend spoons by mind power alone? TM meditators don't truly levitate, but merely hop on cushions? And the list goes on. Naturally, this doesn't mean that all my students became Carl Sagan-like skeptics, but it did open them up, and me as well, to a plethora of other possibilities that are worthy of consideration before succumbing to transcendental theorizing. Addendum. As I was writing this brief memoir about my death and dying class, I started to wonder what happened to Father Pat, since I left teaching high school in the spring of 1984 when I secured a Regents Fellowship to get my Ph.D. in the Sociology of Knowledge at the University of California, San Diego. I did a little research and was not at all surprised to learn that he eventually left the priesthood in the mid-1990s. He got married and wrote a spiritual treatise entitled Beauty and the Priest, Finding God in the New Age. In that text, he explores channeling, reincarnation, and psychic surgery. In looking over his credits, Father Pat mentioned Adele Tinning from San Diego, who was relatively famous in the early 1970s for being proficient at psychic table tipping. Seeing her name in print jarred a long-forgotten memory on my part, since when I was in high school, my girlfriend's mother at the time made sure that Adele Tinning sent me an autographed book with a special message for me. We even corresponded, and Adele once wrote me a long letter explaining her abilities. She seemed like a very sweet person, even though I found her psychic claims to be anything but. John R. Baker of the AAPS, Academy for the Advancement of Post-Materialist Sciences, describes a little about Adele Tinning and her method, taking a more open-ended approach. By the way, I am fairly sure that Father Pat and the nun must have learned of table tipping directly from her. Writes Baker, in class, Tinning described a typical visit to her home. Sitting around the kitchen table, her guests would ask a question of the spirit world. In response, the table would tilt up on two legs and then drop down again. Counting the number of times the table rose and fell before there was a short pause yielded a letter. Stringing these together produced the words of the answer. Occasionally, she reported, the spirits would misspell a word slightly. She would then correct their spelling for the final transcription. Tinning also told us that she dealt with more than one spirit. Sometimes, Jesus would come. According to Tinning, he could be recognized by the gentle manner in which he raised and lowered the table. More often, however, it was Moses who brought the messages from beyond. Moses was a rather rambunctious spirit, and when he was talking, the table would rise and fall tumultuously. Tinning, by the way, told us that neither of these spirits was anything like their biblical characterizations. They were equals in the spirit world, but with personalities as different as those of any two of us. Finally, after this had been going on for about 15 minutes, one of the students who was not seated around the table asked if the effect would be the same if Tinning left the table and a completely different group sat around it. Tinning replied that she had never attempted this, but that it was worth a try. Now, I too sat down at the table. Another question was posed, and the table began to rise. It rose on the side where I was sitting. I had been gently resting my hands palm down upon the table, and the sensation I had was that I was slowly lifting them off of the table, except that the table came with them. The perception of my gentle connection with the table remained as it had been while it had been standing on all four legs. The rising and falling continued some time. While the second group was at the table, Tinning was sitting some feet distant. The room was well lit, and, as with the first group, many of the observers were on their hands and knees, watching what was transpiring underneath the table. As before, no one was able to detect any use of hands, arms, or legs. Apart from Staniford and one other person, all of the observers were either students or friends of students. The exception was a woman who had been introduced to us as a reporter from a local newspaper. She had supposedly heard of Tenning's abilities, was very skeptical of them, and wanted to find out for herself. She was, if I recall correctly, one of the persons who sat around the table as part of the second group. Like Tenning before her, she was not observed to exert any pressure on the table. As far as I could tell, the look of amazement which was written on her face while the table was rising and falling was indeed genuine. Since the room was well illuminated, and because I had personally helped select the table which we used, had been watching both above and below the table while it was tilting during the first session, and was also able to sit at the table during the second, I was forced to admit that my prior learning and experience offered no credible explanation for what I had observed. Perhaps Tinning really was communicating with the spirit world, or perhaps she was tapping into something on a more mundane plane, or perhaps she was simply a very good trickster. I have never received a satisfactory explanation for this event. Until I do, it is stored in my memory under pending. Preface. William E. Robinson. The author of the present volume is not an opponent of spiritualism. On the contrary, he was brought up from childhood in this belief, and though, at the present writing, he does not acknowledge the truth of its teachings, nevertheless, he respects the feelings of those who are honest in their convictions. At the same time, he confidently believes that all rational persons, spiritualists as well as others, will heartily endorse this endeavor to explain the methods of those who, under the mask of mediumship, and possessing all of the artifices of the charlatan, victimize those seeking knowledge of their loved ones who have passed away. As a great New York lawyer once said, it was not spiritualism he was fighting, but fraud under the guise of spiritualism. Owing to the fact that the author has for many years been engaged in the practice of the profession of magic, both as a prestidigitateur and designer of stage illusions for the late Alexander Herman, and has also been associated with Professor Keller, he feels that he is fitted to treat of clever tricks used by mediums. He has attended hundreds of séances both at home and abroad, and the present volume is the fruit of his studies. The great success of the medium is in disarming the suspicions of the skeptic, and at that very moment the trick is done. Slate writing is of course the great standby of mediums, but there are many other tricks which they employ which are described in the present volume. The publishers have added a chapter on miscellaneous tricks, which may serve as a supplement to their magic, stage illusions, and scientific diversions, including trick photography, which has already obtained an enviable position in the literature of magic, and has been even translated into Swedish. These tricks are by Mr. W. B. Kalk and the author. New York, November 1898. Mind reading and kindred phenomena. Having now described the principal slate tricks, which mediums use to entangle the unwary for their own ends, we come to other tricks, which are used from time to time to impress the credulous with the idea that the medium is imbued with supernatural powers and can perform what are, in effect, miracles. These tricks are legion, and they vary from clumsy attempts at mystification to the use of elaborate pieces of magical apparatus which call for a rare mechanical genius in their design and construction. The present chapter will deal more particularly with what might be termed mind-reading tricks and the reading of concealed writing. Of these tricks, one of the most perplexing is that of reading sealed communications, or answering questions placed in an envelope which is well sealed. If I were to tell you that I could read whatever was written on a card enclosed in an envelope, and that envelope not only well sealed, but also stitched or sewn through with a thread and needle or machine, and the thread sealed to the envelope also, without removing the seal, stitches, etc., you would hardly credit the assertion. It is nevertheless true, and is easily and readily accomplished by very simple means. Prepare a sponge with alcohol. With this, you rub or brush the envelope, which immediately becomes transparent as glass, thus enabling you to see through it and read what is written on the card. It takes but a few seconds for the alcohol to evaporate and leave the envelope in the same condition as before, without leaving a trace as to what or how it was done. This test was used most successfully for years by a celebrated Philadelphia medium. We now come to a test often employed. A card is given by the medium to a skeptic, with the request to write a question on it. The medium now holds the card in his hand against his forehead. Presently, he hands the card back to the spectator, and on it, in writing, is found an answer to the question. The medium accomplishes the above feat by means of a little apparatus which is easily attached to the tip of the thumb. Part of it goes under the thumbnail, and the lower part has a small needle point which embeds itself in the flesh. In the center of this little apparatus is a tiny piece of lead pencil. With this clever bit of mechanism, the medium does the writing with the thumb of the hand holding the card. 4 or 5 persons are seated around a table. They are given paper and pencil and requested to write questions. Then fold their papers up and place them in their pockets. The medium will give them replies to their questions. In fact, can tell them the full text of the questions they asked. And, what is more mysterious, he has been out of the room all the time the writing has been going on. To produce this effect, you are provided with a table containing a hollow leg. Now, spread a piece of thin white silk on top of the table, then on the top of that piece of carbon, or duplicating paper, or cloth. Now, over all, a thin table cover, fastened around the edges, so it cannot be raised up and looked under by the inquisitive. To the white piece of silk is fastened a string, leading down the hollow leg through a hole in the flooring to the cellar or room below. Whatever writing is placed on the papers is transferred by the carbon paper to the silk below it. The medium pulls the string, down comes the silk. One corner of the silk has a mark corresponding with a certain corner of the table, and by this method not only does the medium know what is written, but who wrote it, as he has simply to see the position the writing occupies on the silk, and it will have been done by the party occupying the same position on the table. Another way is by using a pad of soft paper and hard pencils, and, after the writing, remove the pads. It will be found that the hard pencil has caused an imprint, or indenture, of the writing on the page below, not readily seen by a casual glance, but easily seen by the skilled eye of the medium. A test sometimes offered is as follows. A card is offered to a person to write a request. It is then placed in an envelope and sealed by the medium and placed on the table, sealed side up. The medium now takes a pencil and slate and writes something on it. It is given to the skeptic who wrote the question, and it is found to be an answer to his query. The medium now opens the envelope by tearing it at one end, and takes out the card containing the question and hands it to the spectator. This is another humbug, and is accomplished by exceedingly simple but bold means. It will be observed that the medium places the card in the envelope, also takes it out. The skeptic never sees it. This is the secret. The envelope, on its face, has a slit cut in it, a little lower down than the opening on the other side of the envelope. This side, the face of the envelope, is never shown. The card, in being placed in the envelope, is deliberately pushed through the slit in the envelope into the medium's hand, and palmed by him and read. Of course, it is an easy matter to write some kind of a sensible answer when the question is known. The card is inserted in the envelope in the same manner as it is taken out. Another trick is to have an answer appear written upon the inside of the body of the envelope, in which is enclosed the question. The envelope is closed and sealed with sealing wax. This is accomplished without disturbing the seal. In the ordinary manufacture of an envelope, 3 of the flaps are stuck together with adhesive gum of far less strength than the 4th flap. which is to be moistened and closed by the user. It is generally an easy matter to insert the blade of a penknife behind the bottom flap, that is, between it and one of the end flaps, and separate them a trifle. Then, if you insert into this a wooden skewer or hard, round-pointed stick, like a pencil, in fact, a lead pencil will do, but look out it does not leave marks behind, and by pushing this along and giving it a rolling motion, you will separate the flaps up as far as the seal, and, if done carefully, without tearing or mutilating the envelope. Now, on a slip of paper, write the answer or suitable message, but in reverse or backward writing, as the words would appear in a looking glass, with a carbon or copying pencil. Pass this slip through the opening in the envelope. Shake it into the desired position. Now rub the envelope over this spot until you think the envelope has taken the impression. Then remove the slip of paper by the same way it came in. Moisten and gum the opening. And the trick is done. In rubbing the envelope, it is a good plan to place a piece of paper over it to keep the envelope clean of marks, which would be liable to appear from damp or moist fingers during the rubbing. The following is from the experiments of a German scientist. He discovered, by the use of an embryoscope, or egg glass, that the shells of eggs were of very unequal thickness. It occurred to him to make experiments in order to ascertain how many leaves of ordinary letter or official paper must be laid above and below a written leaf, in order to make it illegible to a highly sensitive eye in the direct sunlight. He found that after he had rested his eye in a dark room for 10 or 15 minutes, he could read a piece of writing over the mirror of the embryoscope that had been covered with 8 layers of paper. He called in other observers to confirm this. The letters, however, that could be thus deciphered were written in dark ink on one side of the paper only. If 4 sides were folded together, and especially if there had been crossing, it was hard to make out the drift of the writing, and there are some kinds of writing which, when folded thrice or twice, admit too little light for the purpose of decipherment. In this way, possibly, many of the performances of clairvoyance may be explained. By means of the egg glass, it is, as a rule, easier to make out the contents of a letter or telegram without the slightest tampering with the envelope than it is to detect the movements of the embryo in the egg. Suppose the writer of a billet, the contents of which are known only to himself, lets it out of his hands and loses sight of it for 5 minutes. It may be carried either in the direct sunlight or into electric or magnesium light and be read by the aid of the egg glass. The placing of a piece of cartridge paper in the envelope, or the coloring of it black, is a means of defense at hand. In their present form, telegrams cannot be protected from perusal unless delivered at once into the hands of the addressees. A few tests employed by mind readers and clairvoyants, so called from their presumed ability to read other people's minds, will, I think, prove interesting. Let us suppose the performer, as a means of proving his ability to cause his subject to read his mind from a distance, or by mental telegraphy, executes the following feat. His subject, let us say his wife, is at home. The professor is in a public place, a store, or a banking house, etc. He requests someone to write a question. He hands this person a fountain pen and a pad of paper. After the person has done so, he is requested to fold the communication up, place it in an envelope and seal it, and then put it in his pocket. He is now asked to write a letter or note to the professor's assistant, asking her to inform him what it was that he had asked on the paper enclosed in the envelope in his pocket. This note, and the pen also, for fear the lady has no writing utensils, is carried by the gentleman himself to the lady. She reads the request, and, turning the paper over, she writes the answer correctly on the other side. Sometimes, instead of the gentleman himself going with the note, a messenger boy is sent with it, and the answer brought back by him. In either case, the paper and pen are sent along. The pen is an ordinary fountain pen, and it is by means of it that the lady receives the desired information of what has been written. First, the professor has to know what has been written. He simply says to the gentleman, "You must allow me to read the question, for, if I do not see it, how can my assistant see it? For it is through me she is enabled to know." What I see I convey to her by mental telegraphy, and thus convey the communication. After the professor sees the communication, he goes to a desk and gets an envelope, or takes one out of his pocket, and gives it to the gentleman to place his question in and seal it. While this is being done, he stealthily writes on a piece of fine, thin paper an exact copy of the question. This he makes into a little pellet, and places it in the little cap or end that is made to cover the point of the pen for protection. Of course, it is now easy to see the method by which the question is made known to the assistant. She has simply to remove the pellet of paper, unfold it, and read it. Sometimes a pad of paper is used that has cunningly concealed between two of its leaves, near the top, a piece of carbon duplicating paper. These two sheets are pasted around the edges so as to appear as one, and when the person writes a question, it is duplicated on the sheet of paper following the one wherein is concealed the carbon paper. The professor has simply to tear out this sheet and enclose it in the cap of the fountain pen. The name of Foster is almost invariably coupled with any test wherein there is a reading of sealed letters, pellets, etc., just the same as Slade's is connected with the slate writing tests. Foster was an inveterate smoker, anywhere and everywhere, especially at his séance, and it was all for a purpose. The visitor who desired a sitting with Foster was asked to write a few questions on small pieces of paper, fold them up separately, and press them into small balls or pellets. Foster would pick one of these up and hold it to his head, as if to try and penetrate it. Apparently failing to do so, he would place it back on the table. This he would repeat with others. Finally, he hands one of them to the visitor, after holding it against his forehead, requesting him to hold it himself. Foster then took a pencil and paper, and scribbled something on it, and then bared one of his arms, and showed it devoid of any preparation. He then rubbed his arm with his hand, and, on removing it, a name was seen. On reading what Foster scribbled on the paper, the visitor finds an answer to one of his questions, and the name in blood red on Foster's arm is found to be the name of a person addressed by the visitor in the note. Foster had a pellet of paper of his own concealed between his fingertips, and, at some convenient moment, instead of placing back on the table one of the pellets he has just taken up, he substitutes one of his own, keeping the bona fide one in his hand, which he lowers into his lap and unfolds. Holding it in the palm of his hand, he strikes a match and lights his cigar, and while doing so, he is deliberately reading the note, which he afterward crumbles into a ball and conceals in his hand. He now takes up another pellet and tries to see through it by holding it to his forehead. He, however, fails, and gives it to the visitor to hold, really exchanging it for the one he has just read. He now has his own, and the visitor has his. He now allows his hands to lie carelessly in his lap, and, while conversing with the visitor, he pushes one of his coat sleeves up a short distance, and, with a sharp-pointed stick, writes the desired name on his arm, pressing down hard. In a second or two, he writes the answer to the visitor's question, minus the name he has just placed on his arm. He now shows his arm bare, and rubs the spot where he has written, with his fingers slightly moistened, whereupon the name appears in bright pink writing. If it is desired to make it disappear, hold the hand above the head a few seconds. To make it appear again, rub once more with the fingers. Here is another trick which apparently calls for mind reading. The performer's assistant is sent out of the room. Now, a sum of figures in addition is placed on the slate by a spectator. When he has concluded, the performer takes the chalk and draws a line under the numbers, turns the slate downward on a table so nothing can be seen, places chalk on the slate, and retires into a corner of the room. His assistant is now called into the room, steps on the table and seizes the chalk, and marks down the correct answer to the sum of figures, which is on the other side. Like all the tricks that appear the most incomprehensible, this is one of the most simple. The performer stands watching the person as he places down the numbers on the slate. He mentally adds them, and, with his hands behind his back or under his coat-tails, with a lead pencil in one hand, he writes on a piece of chalk, held in the other hand, the correct answer. It is needless to say that it is this piece of chalk he places on the slate, and not the one used. The chalk is scraped or filed flat, a trifle lengthwise. This is to keep it from rolling on the slate, thus avoiding accidental exposure of the writing on it, and also give it a flat surface to write on. Here is an effect I produced as a stage illusion some years ago, somewhat resembling a spiritualistic effect. Hanging up against the scene, at the rear of the stage, was a large blackboard. On this blackboard, writing appeared gradually, done in chalk, as though some unseen hand were actually at work. The blackboard was really nothing but fine wire slate-colored netting. There was a large hole cut in the scene immediately behind the blackboard. This hole was completely boxed in by curtains or woodwork, so as to make it as dark as night. A man was in this space, and he was dressed in a complete suit of black, also a black mask and gloves. He was provided with a pot of white paint, composed of whiting, water and glue, and a brush. Now, the man can see through this netting, but the spectators are unable to see him behind this screen of netting. With the brush and paint, he traces on the wire netting whatever is desired. The paint comes through the meshes of the netting and, adhering to it, makes a very good imitation of a chalk mark. It should be remembered the person doing the writing does so backward, so it will be seen in the correct position when seen by the audience. The following is somewhat in the same line and is called the educated fly. When the curtain rises, a large mirror in a gilt frame is seen resting against an easel. The magician takes the mirror in its frame from the easel and rests it on the floor, showing both sides to the audience. He also removes the glass from the frame and rests the glass against the easel while he exhibits the frame to the audience. The frame has a solid wooden back. The mirror is about 4.5 feet wide and 3 feet high, and after it has been inspected, the magician replaces it in the frame. He now takes a piece of soap and marks the glass off into 28 even squares, which he numbers from 1 to 26, and letters from A to Z. One of the remaining squares is 0, and the other is left, as the prestidigitateur says, for a starting point. He now takes a large fly from the table and places it on a little shelf which projects from the empty square. He then asks that a letter or number be called. As soon as this is done, the fly is seen to travel across the mirror and stop at the desired square. This is repeated time and time again, the fly every time returning to the starting point. The reason for having the mirror separate from its frame and exhibiting it separately is this. It will be remembered that the mirror is resting against the easel as the frame is shown, and that this frame has a wooden back. In addition to the wooden back, it has a cloth back, which is firmly fastened to the frame, and then comes the wooden back. This back is hinged to the frame at the bottom. Now, when the frame is placed on the easel and the mirror rested on the floor, the space behind the easel from the floor up is concealed by the mirror, and this gives an opportunity for a boy to get through a trap in the floor and pull down the back of the frame to make a shelf on which he sits. Of course, the cloth back is still in the frame, so the boy cannot be seen. The mirror is taken up and replaced in the frame. Then it is marked off into squares, as already mentioned. The black cloth is previously marked off into squares, which exactly duplicate those which have been made on the face of the mirror. The fly is made of cork, with an iron core which is set flat against the glass. The boy behind the mirror is provided with a strong electromagnet attached to a wire running down the leg of the easel and under the stage, where it is connected to a powerful battery. He brings up the magnet and several feet of wire with him while the mirror is resting on the stage. When the boy hears the numbers called, he applies his magnet to the corner, where the fly is resting on the little shelf, and the magnetic attraction, working through the glass, draws it successively over the squares until it comes to the desired spot, which the boy can see on his chart, and, of course, the proper letter or figure is indicated where the fly stops. The most Sphinx-like problem ever presented to the public for solution was the second sight mystery. There have been many exposés of mental magic, and some of the best of them are described in Magic, Stage Illusions, and Scientific Diversions, including trick photography. We have now to concern ourselves with mental magic, where the results are obtained by clever tricks. There have appeared, from time to time, before the public, individuals who generally work in couples, termed operators and subjects, who have given performances which were termed mental wonders, silent second sight, etc. The operator invariably tries to impose on the public with the idea that he possesses some mysterious power over the subject, by which he is enabled to communicate information to her by his willpower over her mind, without a word being spoken. There are, of course, various methods of performing this trick, as by a code of predetermined signals in which sentences like the following are used. Say the number. Well, speak out. Say what it is. But these methods are not comparable with the mechanical means which we are about to describe. The operator, after informing the audience of the wonderful powers of divination which the subject possesses, introduces the subject, who is invariably a lady. She is seated on a chair near the front of the stage, in plain view of the audience. Her eyes are heavily bandaged, so she cannot see. A committee is invited to go upon the stage to see that the lady has had her eyes properly blindfolded, and also, ostensibly, to help the operator. A large blackboard is placed at one side of the stage, behind the lady. One of the committee is requested to step to this blackboard and write on it, with chalk, some figures, usually up to 4 or more decimal places. And after he has done so, he resumes his seat. The lady immediately appears to add up the number mentally, calling out the numbers and giving the results of the addition. Each member of the committee is invited to step to the blackboard and touch a figure. No sooner has he done so than the lady calls out the number. Other tests of a similar nature are given, such as the extraction of square and cube root, etc. They all prove that the lady has a thorough knowledge of the numbers on the blackboard and the relative position which they occupy. It is, of course, proved beyond a doubt that the lady cannot see the blackboard. The question then arises, how does she obtain the information? There are 2 methods of performing this trick. In either case, her information is obtained from a confederate, who is generally concealed under the stage, who has the blackboard in sight, and who transmits to the lady the desired information. In one method, the lady has a hole, 1.5 inches in diameter, cut out of the sole of one of her slippers. She places this foot over a hole in the stage, through which a small piston is worked pneumatically by the assistant. The piston is connected with a rubber tube, which runs to where the assistant is concealed. The assistant looks at the blackboard and manipulates the bulb, thus causing the piston rod to strike the sole of the foot, giving signals which can be readily understood by the subject. Robert Heller used a system somewhat similar, only an electromagnet was used instead of the pneumatic piston. Another and bolder method of conveying information is the speaking tube. In this case, a Vienna bentwood chair is used. The chair is specially prepared for the trick. One leg of the chair is hollow, and the air passage is continued to the very top. The lady usually has a long braid of hair hanging down her back, and, if not blessed by nature with this hirsute adornment, she wears a wig. In either case, concealed in the hair is a rubber tube, one end being close to the ear and the other hanging down with the braid, so that when the lady is seated on the chair, the operator can easily connect it with the tube in the chair. There is still a third method, which is so absurdly simple that it deceives even a very knowing committee. The committee places a chair on any part of the stage they may see fit, and the subject seats herself and is blindfolded as before. A thread runs from the side of the subject through a small ring attached to a chandelier overhead. One end of this thread is held by an assistant, and the other end is fastened to a hammer, working on a pivot secured to a metal plate concealed in the hair of the lady, her hair being dressed high. When she walks on the stage, the assistant pulls in the slack of the thread, and when she is seated on the chair, the assistant pulls the thread taut, so that he is able to communicate signals to her by a very slight motion of the thread, which causes the hammer to work on the plate, which is resting very close to the skull, so that the signals are easily felt at every stroke of the hammer. Predetermined signals may be used, or the regular Morse alphabet, as in telegraphing. There are a number of other ways of conveying information, but the three methods we have described are perhaps the best. Table lifting and spirit wrapping. So much has been heard about table tipping and floating tables. It will, I think, prove interesting to explain a few of the clever devices employed to produce the above phenomena. Small, light tables are lifted by the mere laying on of hands. The arms are raised in the air, and the table is seen to cling to the hands and follow every motion. This is accomplished by a pin driven well into the table, and a ring with a slot in it worn on one of the medium's fingers. The body of the pin easily enters the slot in the ring, but the head of the pin, being larger, prevents the table from falling away from the hand. After the table has been floated successfully, an extra strong upward pressure of the hand pulls the pin out, and the table can be examined. Another test on somewhat similar lines is the lifting of a bowl of water by immersing the hand in the basin of water. In this case, a pin is fastened firmly into a leather or rubber sucker, and the finger ring again does the work. This can also be used to lift anything that is not of a porous nature. A table with a well-polished top can be easily lifted. In lifting large tables, the medium is assisted by a confederate among the assembled guests. It is his duty to get as near opposite the medium as possible. The medium and the confederate have fastened to their wrists, by means of a leather cuff and straps, a bent hook. Their hands rest on top and the hooks under the table. By this means, it is a simple task to raise the table. Sometimes the above device is varied. Instead of hooks fastened to their wrists, they use hooks from under their vests, hanging by a loop from their necks. I have seen a square table lifted without the use of either of the above devices. The medium and the confederate simply got the linen cuffs of their right hands well under the corner of the table, and with their hands on top, they found no difficulty in raising the table by this improvised means. Although spiritualists claim they have and can make pianos float in the air, I have never seen it accomplished, and I could never get a medium who is able to produce the effect, and I sincerely doubt if anyone can honestly and truthfully acknowledge they have witnessed it. I saw a small round table once floated in the air without the medium touching it. It was accomplished by means of 2 threads running across the room and worked by 2 confederates. The threads were on the floor and lifted up and allowed to catch under the table. I have also seen a letter raised from a table and float in the air into the medium's hand. This was done also with a thread. One end fastened in the wall above the table the letter rested on, the other near the medium. The letter is not sealed. This allows the thread to go between the flap and letter, or envelope, and when the medium pulled the thread taut, it made an incline for the envelope to travel on, right up to the outstretched hand. Years ago, Robert Houdin, the celebrated French conjurer, produced, at his pretty little theater in Paris, an illusion which, for startling effects, has not since that time been excelled, and the means which he employed for operating the stage machinery have been employed in many stage tricks of more recent date. The stage is set to represent a drawing room, and, in stage parlance, would be called a box set. There are side scenes, as well as a drop or back piece. In the center of the room is a large door, and a grand piano rests against one of the side scenes, a small table being placed near the door. When the illusion is to be performed, a lady enters carrying a bouquet, which she leaves on the table and advances to the piano. See frontispiece. She seats herself, opens the cover of the piano, and plays a short piece. Then, closing down the cover, remarks that she does not feel in the humor to play. She extends her hand toward the bouquet on the table, which mysteriously rises and falls through the air into her hand, and, at the same time, she is seen to rise upward in the air, still seated upon the piano stool. When she reaches a point midway between the ceiling and the floor, she glides toward the opposite sides of the room, and the piano, which seems as if it will not be outdone, rises also, and follows her through the air. This is usually received with great applause by the audience, and the curtain falls. The explanation of the phenomena is the following. In the first place, the piano case is cleverly made out of a papier-mâché, and is really a mere shell containing no keyboard or action. The back of the piano is open. Immediately behind it, in the side scene, is a trap, and at the back of this scene is a real piano mounted on a truck, so that it can be easily moved backward and forward. Our engraving shows both the piano and the trap. When the real piano is run into the papier-mâché case, the keyboard is in its normal position, so that the lady can play upon it. When the lady finishes playing, she closes the lid of the false piano. As soon as this is done, an assistant behind the scene moves the piano back, thus leaving the empty shell, and the trap in the scene is closed. The false piano is, of course, very light, and to it are fastened fine wires, which are invisible at a short distance. One is secured to each corner. These wires run up over pulleys on a truck overhead, which can be run backward and forward immediately over the scene. Each wire is terminated by a bag of sand or shot, which counterbalances the weight of the piano. It will be noticed that there is a fifth wire secured to the false case. It is run up also over the pulley in the truck, and then off to the side of the stage beyond the side scenes. By pulling this wire, the piano is raised or lowered to any desired distance. Counterweights hold the instrument at any position. There is a rope attached to the overhead truck, so that it can be pulled back and forth, thus causing the piano to move across the stage. There are, of course, slits in the ceiling of the mimic stage which allow the wires to pass through. The lady is raised by a curious device. There is attached to the piano stool a clear piece of plate glass, which comes up through a slot in the stage, technically known as a slider. This glass is made to raise or lower by means of a windlass. The glass rests on a cross piece of wood and works up and down in a grooved frame, which is secured to a movable truck under the stage. The slot in the stage is continued in the direction in which the glass is to move, and the carpet is of a marked design which will cover the narrow opening. The bouquet is secured with a thread attached to the piano, and it then goes through the door, where an assistant holds the loose end. A small loop of wire is attached to the bouquet, and a thread runs through it. When the lady enters the room and lays the bouquet on the table, this thread is passed through the loop of wire. When the bouquet is desired to travel to the lady, the assistant has only to raise the end of the thread high enough, and the bouquet slides down the incline and into the lady's hand. A medium in Detroit, Michigan, has lately been hoodwinking the public and coining money with an idea that was quite original. He employed a small, shallow box, composed of wooden sides and ends, and a slate top and bottom. The box and its lid were about even height, and were hinged together. The box contained a telegraph key connected up to a sounder and a dry battery sitting outside of the box on the table. The medium allowed everything to be well examined. It was proved that the battery on the table was the only means of operating the sounder whenever the key was worked. If one of the wires were disconnected, or the box were closed and the key thus out of the way of manipulation, the sounder would not work. After everything was satisfactorily explained, notes were written on pieces of paper, which were folded and placed upon the table. These are taken, one at a time, and placed in the box, and the lid closed. If conditions are favorable, the spirits will be enabled to read one of the enclosed notes, and will send a telegraphic reply over the sounder, and such is ofttimes the result. Of course, we know spirits do nothing of the sort. It is the medium who accomplishes all of this. How does he know the contents of the note? How does he cause the ticker to work with the key enclosed in the box? The visitor is placed on one side of the table, generally facing a window, so as to have the light shine into his or her eyes. The medium sits opposite with his back toward the window. The box containing the key is at his side of the table, with the hinges, or the back of the box, toward the visitor. Now, if the lid of the box is opened and a paper taken off the table, and placed in the box, and the lid closed, you could not tell for certain if the paper was actually placed in or not, for the simple reason that the cover of the box, when up, completely masked the operation. It is by the above scheme that the medium obtains the notes on the paper. The first one or two are actually placed in the box. Then the next one is deliberately dropped into the medium's lap instead of the box. He unfolds it, reads it, refolds it, and, on opening the box, apparently takes it from there and places it back on the table and does not lose track of it. 2 or 3 other papers are placed in it by the visitor, and again taken out by him. Again the visitor is asked to place in it the one the medium knows the contents of. Now the ticker commences to work. With his left hand carelessly resting on the corner of the closed box, the medium writes with his right hand, with a pencil, on a pad of paper, the communication received over the ticker. The visitor removes the paper from the box, and the answer just written by the medium on the pad is found to be a reasonable one to the written request. All that remains to be explained is the working of the sounder. It is very simple. In the first place, the lid and box are hinged so as to be hinge-bound. That is, they will not, of their own weight, quite touch each other, possibly about 1/8 of an inch or less apart. But by the pressure or weight of the hand, they will come together. Now, the telegraph key, like all such instruments, is provided with a tension screw, which can be screwed one way or the other. When the medium desires his instrument to work, he raises this tension screw, to which is fastened the button of the key, just high enough to touch the lid on the inside of the box when it is closed of its own weight. Now, when the hand is resting on the box, he proceeds to make the sounder speak at will, with no perceptible movement of his hand. A simple muscular contraction of the palm of the hand, which cannot be detected, is sufficient to control the sensitive key by pressure of the box cover on it. The whole thing is so simple, and at the same time puzzling, that it makes one laugh to think how little it takes to make a fool of a man. In the case of this medium, the head of the tension screw was brass, and left a brassy mark on the slate top. He soon observed this, and changed it for a hard rubber one, which left no telltale marks behind. Sometimes he did not raise the tension screw, but laid the folded paper the question was written on top of it. This made up the required height. Other mediums improved on the above method by working the key through the box by an electromagnet concealed in the tabletop. The current to the magnets was turned on and off, or broken, as the line is used, by means of a small button in the body of the table, pressed by the medium's leg. This method allowed him to keep his hand off the box. The raps or noises are produced in various manners. Press your boot heel gently against a table leg. The slipping of the leather against the wood makes perfect spirit raps, wood being a good conductor of sound. The raps apparently come from the tabletop if attention is directed in that direction. Some mediums, with the tips of their fingers pressed firmly on a tabletop, slip them, by a dexterous movement, along the varnished surface, thus making very fair examples of raps or thuds. Some mediums, in their own homes, have tables provided with electromagnets concealed in them, by which the knocks are accomplished. Medical experts claim that a very good result can be obtained by the mere displacement of the tendons of the muscle called peroneus longus, in the sheath in which it slides behind the external malleolus. Others again produced it by snapping the toe or knee joints. Watch a boy someday as he snaps his finger joints, and if he were to rest his elbows on the table while doing so, the sound would be intensely strengthened. Spiritualistic ties. Ties have always been one of the great standbys of mediums, second only to slate writing. The following is a simple test with a rope or piece of string. A long piece of rope is given for inspection, and, on its return to the medium, he coils it up and lays it on the table. The two ends are tied together and sealed fast to the table. The coils of the rope are now allowed to drop on the floor. Lights are lowered, and, in a few minutes, when the lights are relighted, the coil of the rope is found with numerous knots tied in it that could not naturally have been accomplished without the ends being untied and unsealed. This mystery is accomplished by simple means. When the medium receives the rope back, he does not coil it up, as a person would, in the ordinary fashion. So they really form half hitches, and, as he lays them on the table, he runs one of the free ends through all the coils, then ties the two ends together. Each coil will now form an overhand knot. An easy manner of manipulating the rope is as follows. The rope is held in the hands, with palms upward. Now, to form the coil, or half hitch, the right hand is given a half twist. This brings the palm facing the person's breast, and back of the hand outward, and leaves the rope, as seen in figure 33. This loop is transferred to the left hand, and the operation repeated until the supply of the rope is exhausted. Now, to make the knots, one end of the rope has simply to be passed through all the loops. I have seen the above test worked also as follows. 2 skeptics were used. One end of the rope was fastened to one of the skeptic's wrists, and the other end to the wrist of the second skeptic. The knots were sealed. The rope in this case was quite long, about 20 feet. The medium now makes the rope up into a few coils. Out go the lights, and, in a few minutes, on the lights being turned up, the rope is found with knots. This is what happens. When the lights went out, the medium went up to one of the skeptics, and, while talking to him and moving him 2 or 3 feet further away from the other skeptic, he has passed the coils over this one man's head, and allowed the coils to drop to the floor. As soon as the skeptic steps out of these, the job is done. There is another test on somewhat similar lines. A short piece of rope is examined, and the performer holds it in one hand and then tosses it into the cabinet, which is empty. On opening the curtain in a few seconds, the rope is found with a knot in it. The performer himself actually ties the knot with one hand in the act of tossing the rope into the cabinet. The rope is held in the hand, palm upward, very near one end, the short end in the hand being with the long end hanging down, the shorter part being between the thumb and the forefinger. The hand and arm are given a kind of half-circular sweep in tossing the rope into the cabinet. This causes the long portion of the rope to swing under, then over the wrist, and across the fingers of the hand. This end is then seized between the fingers and drawn through the loop just made. At the same time, the loop is dropped off the wrist as the rope is tossed into the cabinet. In reading the above description, it seems like 4 or 5 different movements, but with practice, they all blend into one. Here is another test. A single knot is tied in the center of a piece of string. Now the ends are tied together and knots sealed. The lights turned down. On their again being turned up, the knot from the center of the cord has disappeared. The moment there was darkness, the medium started to work, and kept slipping the knot along the string until it joined the rest at the top of the string, where there is not much fear of its being seen. To further protect himself, he uses the following plan. He chews gum, colored the same as the sealing wax used. Now in the dark, when he has the single knot tied against the others at the end of the string, he covers this knot with part of the chewing gum and blends it in with the sealing wax. I will now explain a few ties, rope and otherwise, by which the mediums allow themselves to be tied. It is almost invariably the rule for the medium to suggest to the investigator the general way he wishes to be tied. They must have certain conditions, so they say, or the spirits will not work. It is safe to say the conditions are very strict and always in favor of the medium. The female medium has a preference for ties in which tape or muslin or cotton cloth torn into strips is utilized. The male performer, as a rule, uses rope and wire. I will first describe what is known as the braid or tape test. Take a piece of tape about 3/4 of an inch wide. Have one end of this securely tied around the wrist. Now the person who is conducting the test seats himself in a chair with his hands behind the back of the chair. Now have the loose end of the tape passed between the uprights forming the back of the chair. Have the other end fastened around the remaining hand. The moment you are in the dark, or hidden from view, you can produce any manifestation that requires the use of one or both hands by following these instructions. The first hand can be tied as the investigator pleases. Now, when the second hand is to be tied, keep a strain on the tape enough to keep it taut. By so doing, a square knot cannot be tied on the tape, but simply a running knot, or a knot around the strand of the tape, a knot that can be slid backward or forward. Here is what is known as the cotton bandage test. A ring staple or ring screw eye, the ring being about 2 inches in diameter, is wound around the unbleached muslin of the same color as used to tie the medium's wrist with. This ring is fastened securely into the door jamb or any stationary wooden support by one of the investigators. 2 strips of muslin, about 3 feet long, are given to the investigator. One of each is tied around one of the medium's wrists and the knots sewed and sealed. Her, for the medium is supposed, in this case, to be a lady, hands are now placed behind her, and the ends of the strips from each wrist are now tied together, and the knots tied and also sewed. And what ends are left are evenly cut off near the knots. Another strip of muslin, about the same width and length as the others, is now produced, and one of the committee ties this strip around the knots between her wrists, leaving the ends of equal length. The medium now takes her seat on a small stool, with her back toward the ring in the door jamb. One end of the last muslin strip is passed through the ring and several knots are tied. After tying several knots, the ends of the strips are tacked securely to the woodwork of the door. Another strip is procured and tied around the medium's neck, and then tacked also to the door jamb. 2 more strips are now used, one passed around each arm, not tied, and the ends of each tacked to the door. The committee, having done all the work themselves, of course, are thoroughly satisfied as to its genuineness. They now retire from the cabinet, which has been simply made by a curtain across one corner of the room, forming a triangular space. No sooner is the curtain closed than the usual manifestations occur, such as ringing of bells, tooting of horns, banging of tambourine, etc. Immediately, the curtain is opened, and the medium found securely bound and not a bandage disturbed. Finally, a pocket knife is placed upon her lap. The curtain is closed, and in a few seconds the medium comes forward with her bonds cut, but only the wrists separated. This has been done, she claims, by the spirits, with the use of the knife which was placed in her lap. Now to explain away the mystery. In a convenient pocket in her belt, she has concealed a small, sharp, open knife, with which she cuts through the bands between the wrists. She cuts this band between the knot on her right wrist and the knot in the middle, made by tying the ends of the wristbands together. She now slips the loop, which was tied around, off, leaving it whole and still tied around the ring. She is now free to use both hands, and, as the last strips around her arm were not tied, they are easily managed. She makes what manifestations she chooses, and by placing her wrists one each side of the ring, and clasping her hands together, pressing all tightly together, she is ready for examination. The ring being wound with muslin, one cannot see that anything has changed, and this is the reason it is wound. Another thing to notice is that the spirit cutting is the last test. The reason of this is, if the investigators were to release her, they would discover the secret. Male performers use the same idea for rope ties, from which they find it impossible to release themselves. They have a knife blade soldered firmly on a brass plate, which is riveted or sewed on the back of the performer's trousers, the edge of the knife blade being outward. He has simply to run the rope up and down over this contrivance, and he soon gains his liberty. I will next illustrate a tie made famous by the Davenport brothers. The rope used is what is known in trade as a sash rope. Silver Lake or Samson brand is the best. This is a stiff, polished or smooth, hard-finished rope. With this style of rope, it is an almost utter impossibility to be tied but what you can free yourself. The Davenports, on first being secured, would try and induce or lead the committee who did the tying to do so in a way which would be advantageous to the medium. See Barnum's Humbugs of the World, page 136. The brothers saw they could not wriggle out of the knots. They therefore refused to let the tying be finished. Of course, they did not make the request pointed or apparent, but in the coolest natural way and not suggestive of any conceived plan. Their method was as follows. One of the committee, holding a piece of rope about 12 feet long, as near the center as possible, would be requested to tie first one of the medium's left hands, tying 2 or 3 good, hard, square knots about the wrist, the knots coming to the inside of the wrist or palm side of the hand. The medium, during this part of the tie, faces the audience. He now explains to the person who does the tying that when he, the medium, places his left hand behind his back, he will place his right hand close against it, and requests the skeptic to tie a few or as many knots on top of that hand as he may see fit. The medium, after this explanation, places his hands behind his back and then turns around, with his back toward the audience. The committee man now secures the right hand against the left. The medium now enters the cabinet, is seated in a chair, or on a bench, in which 2 holes are bored. The ends of the ropes are now passed through these holes, and knots tied in the rope close to the seat of the chair, and thence carried to the front legs of the chair, where it is fastened. 2 other smaller ropes are used to tie the medium's legs to the chair. The usual manifestations, such as ringing of bells, tooting of a horn, hands at a cabinet window, etc., take place. After this is repeated a few times, the medium comes forth entirely free from the ropes, which he now holds in his hands devoid of knots. Of course, the medium is really the cause of all the demonstrations, and to accomplish the results, he must free himself. Now, let us see how it is done. The first hand is tied fair and square, but when he places his 2 hands behind his back, that's the time the trick is done. In placing his hands behind his back, and before turning around, with back toward the audience, he catches up a little slack of the rope, and, pressing the 2 hands together, manages not to lose that slack as the 2 hands are tied together. Another plan is employed so as to be certain not to allow this slack to get away from the medium. In the act of placing the hands behind the back, one part of the rope is allowed to go around the middle finger. The ends are then crossed, A going behind B, before the right hand is placed against the left. Of course, the right hand covers the rope, a false tie, completely. When the hand is to be released, the finger has simply to bend down, and off drops the slack part of the rope, and gives plenty of room to draw the hand from the loop. With one hand free, it is easy to produce the desired manifestations, also to release the other hand, and then completely untie the rope. Now, whenever the committee cannot be influenced to tie in the above manner, they are allowed to proceed as they wish. Very few persons can tie a medium securely with the stiff rope furnished. The medium will manage, by slight contortion of his body, to secure a little slack rope by which agency square knots can be easily upset into a slip or running knot. And, when he fails in this, the rope is deliberately cut with a little knife blade on the belt, as described previously. This destroyed rope is now concealed on the medium, and he takes also from his clothes a similar rope and walks out of the cabinet with it, stating, "The spirits had released him." He again retires to the cabinet, and, in a short time, he is found retied, with his hands behind his back, securely fastened. Here is the explanation. When he enters the cabinet, he allows both ends of the rope to hang down, holding the rope in the center. The rope now, in its doubled condition, has a knot tied near its double end, leaving a knot and loop. Then a single knot tied in each portion of the rope, each side of this loop knot, far enough away so as to give length enough for the ropes to encircle the wrists. And these single knots come up hard against the loop knot. The ends of the rope are now run through the loop knot, and 2 loops are thus formed, which can be made larger, as desired, to slip the hands out. The ends of the rope are now run down through the holes in the chair seat, and ends fastened, and the medium inserts his wrists in the loop and pulls up taut, and he is ready for an investigation. It will readily be seen the medium can now do as he pleases. Remove his coat, place on a borrowed one, etc. Another tie frequently used is that in which the medium seats himself in a chair, takes the rope, and ties it around his legs at the knees, with the single knot on top. On this, he places his 2 hands, close together, and has the committee tie his hands with as many knots as they please, from which he nevertheless frees himself. The whole scheme lies in the fact that the medium tied but 1 knot around the legs, but did not pull it deep into the flesh. When the knots are tied over his hands, he keeps the legs a trifle apart. Now, to release himself, he simply has to draw his legs together and strain on the ropes so they sink into the legs a trifle, and let all the slack go above the single knot, thus giving room for the hands to be withdrawn. By forcing the hands apart, the desired slack is easily taken up. Post tests, handcuffs, collars, etc. The spiritualistic post test is one of the latest and most successful of mechanical fastenings used by mediums. The most common form is made of what appears to be a piece of joist. This is given to the committee, one of whose members bores a hole through it, near its upper end, and then passes an ordinary rope through the hole, a knot being tied in the rope on each side of the post. The knots are pressed against the post, so that the rope cannot be drawn through the post. The ends of the rope are now unraveled, and the post is fastened to the floor with spikes. The medium is tied to the post by the unraveled ends of the rope. A nail is driven in the top of the post, and a rope is secured to it. This second rope is held by the committee. After, the curtains are drawn, bells are rung, etc., showing that the medium has the use of his hands. The trick consists in boring a hole in the center of the end of the joist. A chisel is then inserted in the hole, and the opening is closed with glue and sawdust tinted with watercolor. The medium starts the bit, so that there is no danger of the committee boring the hole too low, or so high that it will strike the chisel. When the nail is driven in, it forces the chisel down and cuts the rope. The medium may now ring bells, etc. After he is through ringing the bells, he puts back the ends of the rope in the post. There is another very good rope and mechanical post test, sometimes used by mediums. A post in an upright position is securely fastened to the floor. In the upper part of the post, a hole is bored clear through, to allow 2 small ropes being passed through the opening from side to side. The medium passes the ropes through the post, then invites the committee to tie his hands fast against the post, and then to nail or tie the ends of the rope down on the floor. All the usual manifestations take place. The medium is also instantaneously released, and rope and knots are found undisturbed. By glancing at Figure 38, the mystery will be cleared up. The post is hollow and carries a leaden or iron weight. This weight has a horizontally extending passage to correspond with the channel in the post. This weight is held in the top part of the post by a catch, which is released by a projecting bolt head at the bottom of the post. It will be remembered that the post is made fast to the floor by screws passing through angle irons fastened by bolts to the post. It is one of these bolt heads that releases the catch. At the bottom of the post is another catch, which will also hold the weight at the bottom. The one bolt will release both catches. The medium runs the ropes through the post, releases the catch, which allows weight to drop, carrying ropes with it, and the catch locks the weight at the bottom of the post. They can now tie the medium. All he has to do is to release the weight. He can then pull the rope up and get as large a slack as he desires, allowing the weight to drop back again. There is a chair, an ordinary-looking wooden kitchen chair, worked on somewhat the same style. There is a hole bored through each rear leg or upright of the back. The medium sits on the chair, facing the back of it, and has a hand tied to each upright. The slack is obtained the same as in the post, with the exception that a spring instead of a weight is used, and it is locked or released by the backward or forward sliding of a portion of the chair seat. A convincing trick often employed is the iron ring test. The medium and investigator sit opposite each other, clasping their hands. An iron ring is now placed on the medium's lap, and the cabinet door is closed. In a few moments the door is opened again, and the ring is found on the investigator's arm, although he has never released his hold of the medium's hand. The medium has concealed in his coat sleeve a duplicate of the ring used. When the cabinet door is closed, the medium spreads his legs apart, allowing the ring to drop on the seat of his chair, the bottom of which should be of cane or of cloth, in order to avoid the noise due to the dropping of the ring. He now replaces his legs, and of course, the ring is hidden merely by his sitting on it. The ring, in his sleeve, he tosses onto the skeptic's arm, and, of course, without the hands being unclasped. The handcuff trick is always a great favorite with the medium. He has no objection to placing his hands in any pair of handcuffs furnished by the audience. A few moments after he has entered the cabinet, he begins throwing out various articles of clothing, but, on examination, the handcuffs are found to be still on his wrists. It is impossible to see how he could have taken off his coat. As a final test, the medium comes out of the cabinet holding the handcuffs in his hand still locked. There are only a few styles of handcuffs made, and all the medium has to do is to secure the proper key for each style. He conceals these keys on his person, and by the aid of his fingers and teeth, the proper key can be fitted to the handcuffs. It is impossible, with some types of handcuffs, to get the fingers to the keyhole. If such a pair are placed on the performer, and he cannot use his teeth to hold the key, he slips the key into a convenient crack in the cabinet or in the chair. The lock of the handcuffs being forced onto the key, the handcuffs can then be readily unlocked. The spirit collar is also a favorite instrument of the medium. It consists of a brass collar which fits closely about the performer's neck. Through the openings in the end of the collar is placed a chain. After the collar is on the performer's neck, the chain is placed around a post and carried back and through the padlock used to lock the collar. By this arrangement, the performer is securely fastened to a post, but after he is concealed by the use of any convenient means, he suddenly appears before the audience, minus the collar, while the collar will be found locked, as before. The trick depends, for its success, on the series of bolts with which the collar is studded. The bolts, with one exception, are all false, being pieces of metal simply screwed into the top and bottom of the collar, and not penetrating through them. One bolt, however, passes through the collar and engages the two parts thereof. The parts terminate in a tongue which fits in the socket in the other half of the collar. The bolt passes through this tongue so accurately that there is no danger of it being removed with the fingers. The performer uses a small wrench to remove the bolt. There are numerous other devices, such as trick bolts, which are inserted by a spectator through a post and screwed up tight, the medium being fastened to the bolt. He has simply to give the bolt a half twist, usually toward the right, and the bolt comes apart. The joint is invisible to the eye, and, in fact, is made more so just before it is used each time by being rubbed with sandpaper, which slightly roughens the bolt, making the joint imperceptible to the naked eye. There are staples, ordinary-looking staple plates, which are apparently screwed fast into the bench on which the medium is seated. The hands of the medium are fastened to the staples by wire. The staples are not fastened to the plates by riveting them, as is ordinarily done, but are held by a spring catch, concealed under the plate, and working in a notch in the staple. This is released by the medium's pushing the catch back by the insertion of a piece of clock spring between the staple plate and the bench. After releasing himself, he performs the stereotyped manifestations, and at the finish has simply to jam the staples back into their plate, whereupon they are locked or held fast by the spring catch or bolt. This was a device used by a Boston medium. There are also trick bags in which the medium is bound up or tied. In one style of bag, there is a string running in the selvage, or turned over portion of the bag at the top. As the string is about to be drawn taut, the medium inserts one of his fingers into a portion of this selvage not sewn, and pulls down enough slack of the cord to allow him, after the tying, either to place his arm through or to get out entirely. Another style is this. The medium has a round wooden plug, covered with cloth like the bag. This he has concealed about him. As the mouth of the bag is gathered together to tie the string, the medium inserts this plug, and bag and plug are both tied. After the tying, he has simply to remove the plug, and he can then place his hand through and release the cord, or shove it off the bag completely. Still another way is to have a duplicate bag concealed down one trouser's leg and coming up at the back of the neck under the coat, the mouth of the bag being upward. When the medium gets in, his manager, or the director of the séance, gathers the mouth of the bag together and, at the same time, pulls the duplicate bag from under the medium's coat. He pulls this up 4 or 5 inches higher than the original bag and ties his handkerchief around where the two bags are joined, so the trick will not be detected. He then allows a committee to tie, and even so, the bag together, of course, the duplicate, not the first one. The medium has simply to pull the first bag down around him, get out of it, and conceal it on his body. A dodge used sometimes is to borrow one of the investigator's handkerchiefs and drop it into the duplicate bag. And after the medium has escaped and the bag is given for inspection, the bag is opened and the handkerchief found inside. This strengthens the effect of the trick, inasmuch as it convinces the onlookers that the medium certainly must have got out by the aid of spirits, as the handkerchief, a very small article in comparison to the body of the medium, could not be removed until the spring had been released from the bag. Mediums are great judges of human nature. They know full well the usual action of the human mind, the direction the thoughts are liable to travel in. This is part of their stock in trade, to try to do just such things as the handkerchief dodge, in order to convince the skeptic of the truth of the wonders witnessed. Séances and miscellaneous spirit tricks. A test which made the Eddy brothers famous was their light and dark séances. Horatio Eddy gave what he termed a light séance, and William was famous for the dark séance. Instead of using a cabinet of wood, Horatio formed one simply by stretching a couple of shawls or curtains across a corner of the room, thus making a triangular enclosure. A table containing the usual musical instruments, bells, tambourine, guitar, etc., is placed in this space. The medium sits on a chair in front of this curtain, to the left-hand side. Next to him, on his right, sits a gentleman selected from the audience, and to the right of this gentleman, a lady, similarly chosen. William Eddy now pins across the breasts of the two gentlemen a third shawl, attaching the ends to the curtain. Previously to this, however, Horatio has grasped, with both his hands, the gentleman's left arm. The lady is requested to grasp the gentleman's right arm. In this position, neither can make a movement but what one of the others would be immediately cognizant of it. Presently there is a commotion among the articles on the table behind the screen. They appear floating in the air above the top of the curtains, some coming through and tapping the trio on the head. A hand comes through the curtain and writes a message on the slate held by William Eddy. Numerous other tests are performed, all in subdued light, not darkness. Now, to raise the veil from this mystery. In grasping the left arm of the person in the center, the medium first grasps the gentleman's left arm with his, the medium's, left hand, fingers being spread apart as far as possible. With this hand he presses quite hard, and takes a light hold of the same arm, but above the left hand. If the medium gently and carefully removes the right hand, the action cannot, by sense of touch, be detected. Sometimes, so as to enable him to use both hands, another ruse is also employed. A piece of heavy sheet lead is cut in the shape of the medium's hand. This is placed in his left hand. With this hand he grasps the skeptic's arm. Being made of lead, the hand easily conforms or bends to the shape of the arm, and, what is more, if the real hand of the medium be quietly removed, the leaden hand remains behind, giving the same sense of touch as if the actual hand were there. Of course, with the hands free, the medium can stealthily glide between the curtains, grasp and manipulate the instruments, and throw them to the floor, immediately replacing his hands gently. A rather clever test used in a dark séance, given by Miss Annie Ava Fay, is one in which the hands are not bound. Miss Fay made cotton, bandage, and tape ties a success, and sometimes varied her séance by not using a tie, but by continually clapping her hands together during the darkness. She also had her mouth filled with water. Nevertheless, the usual manifestations occurred. The horn tooted, the tambourine and guitar floated, bells rang, etc. The dodge she employed was this. Instead of clapping her hands together, she slapped one against her forehead, which gave the same sound and gave her one hand at liberty. She also swallowed the water. She was now at liberty to blow the horn, ring the bells, or the like. When she was finished, she refilled her mouth with water from a bottle concealed on her person, and again resumed, clapping her hands together instead of striking one hand against her forehead. An investigator suspected the idea of the water and once came prepared with a glass of milk, which he requested the medium to use instead. She consented. The horn tooted just the same, and the medium's mouth still contained the milk. She had simply inserted the end of the horn in one of her nostrils. Another time, she merely emptied the liquid into one of the handbells on the table and held it upside down in her lap. Still another wrinkle is the use of a rubber ball with a hole in it. This can readily be attached to the horn, and squeezing the ball does the tooting. Dr. Henry Slade was, of course, identified and recognized as the principal slate writing medium, but at various times he presented other phenomena, one of which was the playing of an accordion while held in one hand under the table. The accordion was taken by him from the table with his right hand, at the end containing the strap, the keys or notes at the other end being away from him. He thus held the accordion beneath the table, and his left hand was laid on top of the table, where it was always in plain view. Nevertheless, the accordion was heard to give forth melodious tunes, and at the conclusion was brought up on top of the table as held originally, the whole dodge consisting in turning the accordion end for end as it went under the table. The strap end being now downward and held between the legs, the medium's hand grasped the keyboard end and worked the bellows and keys, holding the accordion firmly with the legs and working the hand, not with an arm movement, but mostly by a simple wrist movement. Of course, at the conclusion, the hand grasped the accordion at the strap end and brought it up in this condition. Sometimes an accordion is tied with strings and sealed so the bellows cannot be worked. This is for the dark séance. Even in this condition, the accordion is played by inserting a tube in the air hole or valve, and by the medium's using his lungs as bellows. In regard to dark séances and materializations, I would state that they are so barefaced and bold, it is hardly worthwhile to worry about them. What cannot be done in the dark? Spirit costumes, to be donned later by the medium to impersonate people from the other world, are concealed in strange places under the very eyes of the investigators, in the body of the guitar, in a drum, about the person of one of the circle of skeptics, who is really a Confederate, or behind the surface of a wall. Time and place make all the difference in the method of work used by mediums. In their homes, mediums have any number of accomplices, who enter the room under cover of darkness by various means. One way, by means of a trap in the floor. This opens upwardly. The carpet does not have to be cut, and can also be well tacked down. The trap is not cut square, but triangularly, across the two sides of the room in one corner. Through this trap, the Confederates, disguised as spirits, enter from the cellar below and vanish. Another method is to gain admittance from an adjoining room. Between the two rooms are sliding doors, misnamed folding doors. The space in one of the walls is not only large enough to receive its own single door, but also a portion of the other. Before commencing the séance, the doors are locked and the key kept by a committee. The doors are also sealed with court plaster across their joints, and said court plaster sealed with sealing wax. The confederates are not obliged to push the doors apart. They simply slide both at the same time toward the side previously mentioned. This side receives one door and a portion of the other, thus leaving an opening for a person slyly to creep through. Sometimes, in the circle of investigators, there are 5 or 6 confederates. 3 of these are placed or seated together. Now, if all in the circle join hands, it seems no one could assist the medium without the fact being discovered. But in the center, one of 3 confederates, sitting together, releases the hands of his companions and, in the dark, cuts up all the tricks he wishes and returns to the circle again, no one being any the wiser. Of course, if one confederate were seated between 2 of the skeptics, he would not dare let go of his hands. But when a friend is placed each side of him, it makes no difference. A test often used, when everybody, medium included, is sitting at a table, is the wire test. A copper wire is threaded through the shirt sleeve of every male member present, and through the sleeve of the ladies' dresses, the wire being fastened to the table by staples. When the lights are put out, the spirits raise Cain again. It is the medium again. The wire did not go through his shirt sleeves, but through 2 extra shirt sleeves, or cuffs, which he wears over the real sleeves. All he has to do is to slip out of these, produce the manifestations, and slip back into the cuffs again. A test that caused more talk and wonderment than all the rest of the cabinet tricks combined is the chair and net test. The medium enters a very small cabinet, just large enough to contain him when sitting down in a chair. The cabinet is closed by a single door, locked with a padlock, the keyhole of which is sealed. The door is also sealed all around the edges. A fish net, so finely meshed that even the finger of the medium could not be pushed through, is now placed over the cabinet and tacked to it all around the bottom. This miniature cabinet is set in the cabinet proper, and a chair, with the usual bell, tambourine, etc., placed beside it. Doors are closed, and immediately the fun begins. Bells, tambourine, and horns all play together. A sudden fall of the chair and instruments is heard, and the cabinet doors being opened, everything is found strewn about. The smaller cabinet is, however, still found as it was left, with the netting over it and seals undisturbed. Again the large cabinet is closed, and almost immediately it is opened from the inside, and out walks the medium, and the netting on the smaller cabinet is examined once more, and likewise the padlock and seals. Everything is found intact. The whole trick depends upon the construction of the smaller cabinet. Figure 41 represents a ground plan of the apparatus. The floor is not nailed or fastened to the sides. There are 4 battens or strengthening pieces, one in each corner of the cabinet, running from top to bottom. These are securely fastened to the floor, but not to the sides of the cabinet. Over these battens is laid a strip of wood that is really made fast to the cabinet. This leaves in each corner a socket or pocket the height of the cabinet, and these work in telescopic fashion, the 4 battens which are made fast to the bottom. The bottom is set inside of the cabinet, not on the outside. It is only tacked to the sides of the bottom of the cabinet. It will now be readily observed that the medium has only to stand up in order to raise the main part of the cabinet quite a height above the bottom, as seen at figure 42. It is held in the above position by a concealed catch. The medium can now produce manifestations, and, as he is about to drop the cabinet back into the bottom, he gives the leg of the chair a jerk, and over it goes, and down drops the cabinet. There is also a catch that automatically locks the bottom firm to the cabinet, so as to allow inspection of the same. The above manifestation was in use long before the wire cage test, and is considered by some mediums more convincing than the latter. While speaking about the wire cage test, I may as well describe one form of it. There are numerous makes, but the one explained will serve as a sample of the rest. A cage composed of uprights and crossbars of iron. is made fast to an iron frame containing a small door through which the medium enters. Sometimes the door is done away with and the bottom of the cage is separated from it. The medium sits on this bottom and the cage is lifted and placed over him. The bottom and cage are padlocked together or bound with wires and sealed. No matter what method is used, the results are the same. The medium can play the instruments or escape as he may see fit. The wire cage is, we shall say, of a design similar to that shown in figure 43. There is no door to it, and the cage being secured by a wire bottom padlocked on or nailed fast to the floor. A close inspection of figure 44 will help to expose the fraud. The lower crossbar is not riveted through the frame at its end, but ends square against it. And a false rivet head, having no connection with it, is riveted on the frame where this crossbar is supposed to emerge. All of the upright rods are made fast only to this crossbar. In the other crossbars, they simply go through holes, not closely, but loosely, to ensure then to be slid up and down. The tops of these rods are riveted, but not made fast to the frame at the top. The center rod is not made permanent in the lower crossbar, but is fastened so it can be turned around one way or the other. Now, where all these rods are supposed to come through the lower part of the iron frame, are rivet heads representing the heads of the rods, should they have come through. The bottom frame is drilled halfway through for the end of each rod to enter a little. The middle rod is tapped with a thread like a screw on its end, and its corresponding hole is also tapped. It will now be seen why this rod was left to turn. By pulling the crossbar down and then screwing this middle rod tight, everything is solid. But unscrew the rod and raise the crossbar, and all the upright rods will travel with it, and the medium is at liberty. And we have another spirit mystery laid bare. I could describe numerous other tricks and devices of a like nature, but a few are as good as a quantity, sufficient, in fact, to place the investigator on his guard against being duped by like contrivances. I believe a few words in regard to spirit photography will not be amiss. These are made or produced in various ways. First, a glass with an image on it of the desired spirit form could be placed in the plate holder, in front of the sensitive plate, so that the image on the glass would act on the sensitive plate. The size and distinctness of the resulting spirit form would vary according to the distance between the two plates. Second, a figure clothed in white can be introduced for a moment behind the sitter and then be withdrawn before the sitting is over, leaving a shadowy image on the plate. Third, a microscopic picture of the spirit can be inserted in the camera box alongside of the lens, and by a small magnifying lens, its image can be thrown on the sensitive plate with that of the sitter. This is the trick used when the skeptic brings his own plate for the negative. Fourth, a glass with the spirit image can be placed behind the sensitive plate after the sitting is completed, and afterward, by a feeble light, the image can be impressed upon the plate with that of the sitter. Fifth, the silver nitrate bath could have a glass side, and the image impressed by a secret light while the glass plate apparently was being coated with sensitive film. Sixth, the spirit form can be printed first on the negative, and then the living sitter by a second printing, or the spirit can be printed on the paper and the sitter's portrait printed over it. Seventh, a sensitive plate can be prepared by what is known as the dry process, the spirit form being impressed on it, and then, at a subsequent time, the portrait of the living sitter can be taken on this same plate, so that the two will develop together. Eighth, take a solution of sulfate of quinine and paint on the background screen a picture of any one. When it dries, it is invisible to the naked eye. Still, when the picture is taken, the painted picture is very plainly seen on the glass negative. Ninth, small pictures are taken on thin, transparent celluloid and fastened against the front lens of the camera, and when the photograph is taken, the picture appears. Of course, the above are by no means all the methods, but enough to illustrate the possibilities of obtaining two pictures on the same plate or at one sitting. Miscellaneous tricks. The magician's omelet. The magician has never proved himself an adept at the art of cooking, from an epicure's standpoint. Yet the ease with which he can bake cookies in borrowed hats and cook omelets in empty pans has long been a source of wonder to the economical housewife, as well as to the professional cook. To see the magician hold a small, shallow, empty pan over the blaze of a spirit lamp for a few moments, when an omelet, done in turn, appears in the pan and is cut up and distributed to the audience, one is almost convinced that at least one person has solved that most perplexing of all problems, how to live without work. But has he solved it? No, my friend, no more than you or I. He has merely deceived you, but most cleverly, you must admit. The pan is without any preparation whatsoever, but as much cannot be said of the wand, which he is continually stirring around in the pan. This wand is hollow, with an opening at one end only, and in the wand, previous to the trick of course, are placed the properly seasoned ingredients of an omelet, after which the end is closed with a metal plug that is turned and enameled to correspond with the opposite end of the wand. When the pan is being examined, the performer is holding the wand in his hand, and such an innocent-appearing black stick is never suspected of being in any way connected with the trick. Just before holding the pan over the lamp, the performer finds it a most easy matter to remove the plug from the end of the wand, when, by holding the wand by the closed end, he can empty the contents into the pan in the mere act of passing the open end of the wand around the inside of the pan. The metal of which the pan is made being thin, and there not being a great quantity of the omelet, assisted by a large flame from the lamp, it only requires a few moments to cook the omelet, when it is turned out on a plate and carried down to the audience. It is hardly necessary to say that when a cooked omelet is carried down, the wand is left on the stand, which prevents any inquisitive person asking to see it. Spinning and balancing tricks. The spinning handkerchief is a great favorite with jugglers. A handkerchief is borrowed, thrown in the air, and caught on the end of a whirling stick held by the juggler, when the handkerchief spreads out to its full size and commences to spin around rapidly. The secret is that in the end of the stick, a needle is inserted about 1/4 of an inch, leaving the sharp end out. When the handkerchief is caught on the end of the whirling stick, the needle point passes through it, thus preventing its falling off the stick, which is rapidly whirled around, and the handkerchief will spread out and spin about on the end of the stick. Jugglers are very partial to tricks performed with eggs, and spinning an egg on its smaller end is a trick they are almost sure to perform. It is impossible to spin a raw egg, so our juggler uses a hard-boiled one, and it spins on its small end in a shallow japanned tray. If the tray is kept gently moving in a small circle in the opposite direction to that in which the egg is spinning, the latter will continue to spin as long as desired. The egg spinning trick is usually followed by a balancing trick, in which a playing card is balanced upon a small wand, and an egg is then balanced on a corner of the card. This trick usually calls forth a great pretension of skill on the part of the performer, when, in reality, no skill whatsoever is required. The wand is of ebony, or some dark wood, and about 3 inches from one end is a small hole. The egg is made of wood, painted white, and with a small hole in one end. The card is composed of 2 cards glued together, with a fine steel wire between them, running diagonally from corner to corner of the card, with the ends of the wire projecting about 1/4 of an inch. The prepared egg is on a plate, with several ordinary eggs, and the card is placed on a pack of common cards. The wand is held in one hand, the card taken in the other, and apparently balanced on one corner of the wand. But in reality the wire point is placed in the hole in the wand. Now the assistant passes the prepared egg to the juggler, who carefully balances it upon the corner of the card, that is, slips the hole in the end of the egg over the wire point projecting from the card. A fitting finale to such a juggling act is that in which a potato is placed on the hand of the assistant and cut in two with a sharp sword, without leaving any mark upon the skin. As a general thing, a second potato is then cut upon the throat of the assistant. This apparently marvelous mastery of the sword always brings forth great applause. Among the several medium-sized sound potatoes on a tray are placed 2 potatoes prepared as follows. Insert a needle crosswise of the potato near the bottom. After showing the sword to be really sharp, by cutting paper and slicing 1 or 2 of the potatoes, the performer picks up one of the prepared potatoes and places it on the assistant's hand. But apparently it does not lie to suit him. So he slices off one side of it, using care to cut away the side just under the needle and as close to it as possible. Then places the potato once again on the assistant's hand. After making a few flourishes with the sword, he cuts through the potato, dividing it in half. In striking the potato with the sword, he makes sure the sword will come exactly crosswise on the needle. Consequently, when the sword reaches the needle, it can go no farther, and the brittle nature of the potato will cause it to fall apart, the very thin portion below the needle offering no resistance to the separation. The second potato is then cut in the same manner on the assistant's neck. There are many other false juggling tricks, but the above will suffice to show that there are tricks in all trades but yours. The blindfolded juggler. While watching the clever manner in which a good juggler passes various articles from hand to hand, how many people ever give a thought to the many hours of practice devoted to even the simplest trick that he performs? To become even a passable juggler, many weary months of constant practice are necessary. There are tricks in all trades, and some of the most successful entertainers in this line can scarcely do half a dozen genuine feats of juggling. Yet they are great favorites with the public. It has been truly said that the tricks that require the most practice are the least appreciated by the average spectator. It is our intention merely to show how a simple trick has won fame for several well-known jugglers. This is the trick of juggling blindfolded. An assistant tightly binds a heavy handkerchief over the juggler's eyes, and then, to make sure that he cannot see, there is placed over his head and shoulders a sort of bag, made of heavy goods, which should exclude all light, even if his eyes were not tightly bound with the handkerchief. Regardless of this, the juggler performs the usual passes with balls and knives. Yet, when the bag is removed, the bandage over his eyes is found undisturbed. The explanation is simple. The bag is made of the usual coarse bagging, and a few threads are pulled out of the part that will come in front of the juggler's face when the bag is over his head, thus allowing him to see between the remaining threads as though looking through a coarse screen. When the bag is being placed over his head, and during the seeming effort of passing the arms through the armholes in the bag, the performer or assistant has no trouble in pushing the handkerchief up from his eyes to the forehead, thus allowing him to see through the open work of the bag. In removing the bag after the act, there is no trouble in pulling the handkerchief down over the eyes. The Chinese rods and cords. Nothing excites curiosity in the public mind more than a simple and clever puzzle, and the 15 puzzle and pigs in clover have given enjoyment to hundreds of thousands. The Chinese rods and cords, which forms the subject of our engravings, is in the line of ingenious inventions, and is really more in the nature of a trick than a toy. It is of Chinese origin, and the example shown in our engraving was purchased in Chinatown, San Francisco, California. The puzzle consists of 8 pieces of bamboo or hollow ivory tubes, each containing 7 holes spaced equidistantly. Through these holes are seen to pass 7 silken cords, each with a bead at the top and a tassel at the bottom. The toy is held by the loop at the top, which serves to hold the upper rod. When it is first picked up, its condition is shown in our first engraving at the left. There are 7 of the rods at the top and 1 at the bottom. Now the lower bar of the upper set is moved down to the bar at the bottom. The 2 lower bars will appear to be supported by 3 cords at the center, as shown in our engraving, 4 of the cords having vanished. If the next bar is brought down, another change is observed, only the 2 outer cords being seen. This is shown to the right of our engraving. If the next bar is brought down, the end cords have approached the center, and 5 of the 7 cords have vanished. The next rod brought down brings 5 cords into view, the two end ones and the center one being visible. When the next bar is pulled down, the center and the outer chords only remain, so that if all the bars between the top and bottom bars are brought together, the 7 chords appear to pass entirely through them. Figure 53 gives a clue to the mystery. The rods are all hollow, and each contains 7 holes, and our engraving shows the course of the silk cords. It will be noticed that where a number of cords pass through a single hole, the strand which is formed is much thicker than are the single cords. As they are of different colors, the effect is most pleasing. It will be observed that the strings go clear through the top bar, but in the next bar, although they enter the 7 holes at the top, they emerge from 3 holes at the bottom, 3 of the strands going through the center hole and 2 through each of the end holes, and so on throughout the entire number of bars, the strings changing their course, as is clearly shown in our engraving, thus causing the increase and decrease in their number. The surprise pin. Our engraving shows a very clever trick pin, which would tend to create great surprise among the uninitiated. Let us suppose that a gentleman is seated at his desk and is busily writing when a neighbor comes in, and he jokingly challenges the latter to try and forge his signature. He hands the pen to his friend, who attempts to write. Immediately, there is an explosion, and the paper receives a big ink blot. The writer is apt to be surprised by the report, which is like a pistol shot, and, if a timid person, is apt to be frightened. The noise comes from the pen itself, as it is so constructed that it can be loaded and shot off at will. The person in the secret can handle the pen with safety, but the poor unfortunate will experience a rather unexpected shock to his nerves when he attempts to write with it. The upper part of the pen holder, into which an ordinary pen is thrust, works on a pivot about halfway down its length. This separate part is provided with only 1/2 a bottom, in order that it may engage the conical head of a piston rod, which ends in a plunger, which sets off the cap secured in the bottom of the pen holder. The normal position of the plunger is against the cap of the holder, but it can be raised by means of a projecting pin riveted to the rod and passing through a slot cut in the side of the lower part of the holder. Now, the closed half of the bottom of the pivoted end enters a notch caused by the conical head of the plunger, and the plunger, with its spring, is cocked, as it were, by means of the projecting pin, and is held in place by the bottom of the pivoted section. When the pen is pressed to the paper, the pivoted section swings on the pivot, releasing the plunger, which is forced down on the explosive cap by the spring. The lower end of the pen holder is threaded, so that it can secure the end cap firmly in place. The explosive cap is put in the end cap and is screwed on the bottom of the holder. Ordinary paper caps for children's pistols are used. As long as the plunger simply rests on the cap, there is no danger of an explosion. But just before the joker wishes to give his friend a scare, he cocks it by pushing the plunger up with the pin, until the pivoted top engages it. The miraculous wine glass. As a rule, magicians are very generous fellows, always ready to give their audiences something, such as coins and handkerchiefs, but just when one thinks they have the gift securely in their grasp, it mysteriously vanishes. However, there are a few exceptions to this rule, one of whom is a very popular English performer. This magician goes among the audience and borrows a gentleman's handkerchief, and immediately produces from it a glass filled with sherry. This he offers to the ladies. Then, shaking the handkerchief, he produces a second glass full of port for the gentlemen, next one of ginger beer for the younger members, and one of milk for the very young. But there being present 1 or 2 teetotalers, he next produces a glass of water, and lastly, a glass of stout for himself. All of these are pronounced by the audience to be excellent. The glasses are of the small stem wineglass pattern. On both sides of the magician's coat, inside of course, are large pockets, and in each pocket is placed in a prearranged form 3 of the glasses, to prevent a possible spilling of their contents, and, as each glass is filled to the brim, this would be very difficult. There is fastened over the mouth of each glass a thin soft rubber cap or cover, as shown in the small engraving. To produce the glass, the performer spreads the borrowed handkerchief, which should be a large one, over his breast in such a manner that one hand is concealed under it, and with this hand he reaches in the pocket and brings forth the proper glass, removing the rubber cover and leaving it in the pocket. This move is repeated until all the glasses have been brought out. After producing 3 of the glasses with, say, the left hand, he must spread the handkerchief so as to cover the right hand, leaving the left one free to manipulate the handkerchief, as it would be most awkward to try and produce the glass from both sides of the coat with the same hand. This trick is a most effective one, as the spectators cannot understand how it would be possible for the performer to conceal a glass filled to the brim, as these are about his person. After distributing the glasses, and offering an apology for his inability to treat all present, he pretends to overhear a remark that his audience is not satisfied, and that many think they have been slighted. He states that he will endeavor to comply with the demands of his thirsty audience, and retires to fetch a bottle. Off the stage, he removes his coat and places under his right arm a rubber bag filled with wine. To the bag is attached a rubber pipe with a small metal point, which he holds next to his arm and replaces his coat, leaving the metal end just within the cuff. The bottle has a small hole in the side, near the bottom, of such a size as to fit the metal point on the rubber pipe. In rinsing the bottle, the performer keeps one finger over the hole, thus preventing the audience discovering that the bottle differs from an ordinary one. In rinsing the bottle, the outside has become wet, and in drying it with a cloth, the performer places the metal point on the rubber pipe, in the hole in the side of the bottle, thus making connections with the bag of wine. By holding the bottle well down toward the neck, and close to his wrist, he can venture among the audience without fear of detection. By pressing the right arm against his side, the bag is compressed, forcing the wine through the pipe into the bottle. The glasses are of special make and of very thick glass, making quite a bulky appearance, but of very limited capacity. An assistant carries a tray containing 100 of the glasses. The mysterious vase. Tricks performed with ink and water have always been favorites with magicians, and they have devised means of keeping this trick fully abreast of the times, thus retaining its popularity. The manner of performing the latest ink trick involves such novel principles as to puzzle even those who are well posted on modern magic. The mysterious vase has been presented by but few prestidigitateurs, and the secret is so well guarded that comparatively few people know how it is done. The attention of the audience is called to a glass vase that is filled with water which is resting on a light stand. This vase resembles a large octagon celery glass. In the vase there are a few cut flowers, which the performer removes as he calls attention to the vase and the clear water it contains. The flowers are given to the ladies in the audience, as they have no further connection with the trick. A lady's handkerchief is borrowed and the vase covered with it for a moment. On removing the handkerchief, the water that was seen in the vase appears to have changed to ink. While this rapid transformation is very startling, yet the most marvelous part of the trick is to come. The magician bares his forearm that the audience may see that his sleeves have no connection with the trick, and then proceeds to remove from the ink in the vase 6 silk handkerchiefs and 2 lighted candles, each article being perfectly dry. The means by which this seeming impossibility is performed are as simple as the trick is mysterious, as the following will show. In the center of the vase, reaching from side to side and from the bottom to within a ½ inch of the top, is a piece of polished mirror. The side edges of the mirror rest in the angles of the vase, and as the vase is only seen from the front, the edges are not seen. The front half of the vase being reflected in the mirror leaves the impression that no one is looking directly through the vase, when in reality you only see 1/2 of the inside. To the back of this mirror is attached a watertight tin box, in which are placed 6 small silk handkerchiefs and 2 candles. The exterior of the box and back of the mirror are painted a dead black color. Enough water is poured into the vase to reach the top edge of the mirror. In the water is dissolved a small portion of iron protosulfate. A few cut flowers are placed in the vase, which is then placed on the stand with the mirror side to the audience and the candles lighted. After the flowers are removed and a handkerchief borrowed, the magician secures possession of and palms between his fingers a small lozenge made of pyrogallic acid, which he drops in the water in front of the mirror in the act of covering the vase with the handkerchief. In a very few moments, the lozenge dissolves, and the pyrogallic acid of which it is composed causes the water, which holds in solution the iron protosulfate, to change to a good black ink. On removing the handkerchief with which the vase was covered, ink is seen to have taken the place of the water, and from the center of the vase, the performer removes the silk handkerchiefs and candles. Our first engraving shows the vase of water on the stand. The second shows the vase after the water has changed to ink, with the magician removing one of the silk handkerchiefs. The third illustration represents the vase with one side broken away, showing attached to the back of the mirror the tin receptacle that contains the handkerchiefs and candles. The Mermaid's Head. M. Albert, the prestidigitateur, describes in La Nature a variant of a trick which, although old in principle, has recently been brought out in a new and attractive form. Upon a light tripod placed in an alcove or recess hung with some sort of a red fabric, such as cotton velvet, stands an aquarium in which goldfish are observed swimming about, and in the center of which is seen a living female head that moves, smiles, and seems to be absolutely at its ease, although deprived of a body and immersed in water. A reference to the figure will show how the apparatus is arranged. The tripod consists of 3 gilded copper rods fixed at the bottom to a triangular platform and supporting at the top another platform of nickel-plated metal. At their point of union, the 3 rods, which are firmly braced to each other, seem to be united by a simple ribbon tied with a bow knot. From the base to the ribbon, there is an empty space, but above the latter there are fixed between the rods 3 triangular glass mirrors, backed with a thin and resistant steel plate. The nickel-plated top is movable. Previous to the entrance of the spectators, the woman whose head is to appear places herself between the mirrors, crosses her legs, and rests upon her heels. It is impossible for the apparatus to topple over, since it is firmly screwed to the floor. The nickel-plated top, which is in 2 pieces, embraces the neck so closely when put in place that the joint can scarcely be seen at a short distance. Since the mirrors reflect the floor, which is covered like the walls, it seems as if it were the back of the alcove that is visible between the rods at the upper part, and the entire apparatus appears to be absolutely open. As for the aquarium trick, that is simple. The aquarium is an adaptation of one that has long been found in the market, and in which are perceived birds that seem to be flying about in the water amid fishes. The crystal glass aquarium, which is manufactured especially for the purpose, consists of 2 receptacles. The central one of these is open at the bottom to receive the head, while the outer one is open at the top and contains the water and fishes. As the glass is exceedingly transparent, it is almost impossible to detect the empty space in the center. The aquarium is placed upon 4 small nickel-plated supports that permit of the introduction of air into the internal receptacle. The position of the decapitated woman is an exceedingly cramped one, and it is therefore necessary for her to make her exit from the tripod between each exhibition in order to take a well-earned rest. Card cricket. One of the most effective and pretty tricks performed by the celebrated English magician Mr. Devant is known as card cricket. In this trick, the performer shows his hands empty and takes a pack of cards and requests 3 ladies to take 1 card each and to remember what the cards are. The cards are then replaced in the pack, which is well shuffled and cut by one of the audience. The performer then passes for inspection an ordinary cricket bat, which, on its return, he places on a table in full sight of all. He then asks if anyone in the audience can bowl and requests the gentleman who can to come and have a game of cricket. The performer now asks the gentleman to take the pack of cards and bowl at him. and he will be the player or one at the wicket. The performer picks up the bat and says, "Play." The cards are bowled at him, and he hits the pack with the bat as the cards are in the air, and, to the astonishment of the audience, the chosen cards are seen sticking to the bat. This very pretty card trick is quite simple to work. In selecting the cards, the ladies were under the impression that they were exercising their own free will, but such was not the case. The pack of cards was what is known to magicians as a forcing pack, that is, consisting of only 3 cards, which, for convenience sake, we will say are the ace of clubs, 5 of hearts, and 9 of spades, 1/3 of the pack being composed of only one of these cards. The pack being thus made up, it is very easy for a skillful performer to present to the first lady the portion of the pack containing only ace of clubs, to the second lady the part consisting solely of 5 of hearts, and to the third lady the part that contains only 9 of spades. By using such a forcing pack, the performer is sure to have the proper cards selected. While the ladies are examining their cards, the performer steps to his table on some pretense, and slyly changes the forcing pack for an ordinary one consisting of the usual cards, with the exception of the 5 of hearts, ace of clubs, and 9 of spades. This pack he hands to some member of the audience, and requests them to have replaced the selected cards and shuffled. The cricket bat is an ordinary one, which, after being examined by the audience, is laid on a table until the performer finds a gentleman who will bowl the pack at him. In this simple act of laying the bat on the table, we find the principal secret of the trick. Previous to beginning the performance, the magician has placed face down on the table, in a line with each other, an ace of clubs, 5 of hearts, and 9 of spades. The back of each of these cards is lined with cloth similar to the covering of the table, thus preventing anyone noticing the cards when placed face down on the table. On the cloth covering of each of the cards is smeared a dab of soft adhesive wax. In placing the bat on the table, care is taken to lay it directly over the 3 cards, the wax on the backs adhering tightly to the bat. After the gentleman, who has consented to bowl the pack of cards at the performer, is in place, the performer picks up the bat, steps back a few feet, and says, "Play." The instant the flying cards touch the bat, the performer turns it over, bringing into view the side of the bat to which the 3 cards are sticking, which appear to have been caught on the bat from the flying cards. Until the pack of cards are thrown against the bat, the magician exercises the greatest care not to turn the side of the bat to which the cards are sticking toward the spectators. Properly presented, this trick has proved most elusive. Cupid, lighter than a butterfly. The pleasing trick which forms the subject of our engravings owes its success to the ingenious application of mechanical principles. The magician presents for inspection to the audience a large pair of balance scales. The audience is allowed to examine the various parts of the balance before it is erected on the stage. It consists of a central column and a beam resting on a knife edge, and 2 pans suspended by cords or chains. After the column has been put in position, the beam is put on and a pin inserted, thus making a center for the beam to work on. A gentleman is asked to stand in one of the scale pans, and then weights are gradually placed in the other pan until his exact weight is ascertained. The weights are removed, and the gentleman steps down off the stage. The audience is now convinced that the scale is to all intents and purposes like the ordinary balance which is so much used in groceries for weighing tea, coffee, etc., although, of course, in the present instance, it is built on a mammoth scale. The magician now goes on to say that he will prove the old assertion that love is lighter than a butterfly to be absolutely true. He introduces a little boy dressed as Cupid, with wings and a bow and a quiver of arrows. When the child steps on the scale pan, it immediately sinks to the floor by his weight. The conjurer now takes a butterfly and, asking all to direct their attention to the scale, drops it on the opposite pan, which immediately descends to the floor, at the same time raising the pan with the Cupid high in the air. If he takes the butterfly off, the Cupid descends, and every time the prestidigitateur replaces the butterfly, Cupid is raised off the floor. The trick depends for success upon a carefully devised and concealed mechanism. The balance beam is devoid of any preparation, but the mechanism is clearly concealed in the column, and motion is imparted to the beam by means of a shaft and bevel gears. The hole in the beam is not perfectly round. It is slightly oval, but not enough so to be easily seen by a casual glance. The pin is also oval instead of round and is made to fit tightly. It will be seen that, when the pin is rocked or tilted, the beam is moved, carrying one scale pan up and the other down. The top of the column is of considerable size, and one side of it is cut away to admit of a bevel gear, which also has an oval hole, the same as the beam. When the balance is put together and the beam is placed in position, the oval pin passes through the bevel gear and the beam, forming a horizontal shaft. This vertical wheel meshes with a horizontal gear wheel, which is also secured in the head of the pedestal. A shaft runs through it to the space below the floor, where it terminates in a lever secured at right angles. The magician's assistant, under the stage, grasps the lever and, pulling it back and forth, transmits a seesaw motion to the beam through the medium of the shaft, the two bevel gears, and the oval pin. The trick depends very largely for success upon the apparent willingness of the prestidigitateur to allow all parts of the apparatus to be examined, and, as the gear wheels are very clearly concealed, there is almost no chance of the trick being discovered.